My name is Piper. I am 36 years old, and I used to work in finance in Ohio. After nearly 2 decades of giving to others, I scraped together every dollar I had in savings just to buy a rundown house at a public auction for $1,200. No one else bid because no one wanted it, except me. It was falling apart, peeling walls, a leaky roof, a damp basement, but it was the first thing in my life I was allowed to call my own. I hadn't even set a suitcase down before my parents' shiny SUV pulled up to the gate. Stepping out were not just them but my sister Ivy, wearing a cashmere dress and oversized sunglasses that hid half her face, and a man in a suit carrying legal papers. "This house does not belong to you," my mother said, her voice flat. "Hand over the keys immediately." A rotten house bought for $1,200, and my parents brought a lawyer to claim it back. Why? Why were they afraid of me being in that place? What was under those rotting floorboards that made the whole family want me out as fast as possible? Have you ever had your own small dream pulled away by the people closest to you? Have you ever had to fight for your freedom against those who once called themselves family? Leave a comment below if you've ever felt like a stranger inside your own family. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because the story you're about to hear is not just about a house. It's about everything they wanted to keep hidden, and I will expose it, piece by piece. I was born and raised in the suburbs of Columbus, Ohio, in an old tile-roofed house with a weathered white picket fence and a front yard my father never once let me touch. "Heavy work isn't for daughters," he used to say, but that rule only applied to Ivy. As for me, if I wasn't mopping the floor, I was pushing the lawnmower around the backyard while my mother and sister tried on lipstick in the air-conditioned living room. I was the eldest, the quiet shadow behind every family photo framed on the walls. When I started college, my mother didn't attend orientation, saying she had to take Ivy to do a cover shoot for the high school magazine. When I graduated with a degree in finance and a nearly perfect GPA, my father sent one short text: "Good. Now get a job." But when Ivy was chosen as a model for an online jewelry brand, he took the whole family out for a steak dinner to celebrate. I wasn't jealous. I just didn't understand. I worked at an investment bank in downtown Columbus for 8 years, dry, steady work. I quietly saved every penny, living in a tiny dorm-like room, never buying designer things, never traveling, no spa days, no selfies. I had one goal: to escape the feeling that I was a renter in my own family. I was close to reaching that goal until the day I discovered the colleague I trusted most. Thomas, the person I had helped through 2 performance reviews, had stolen my work to get a promotion. He took the presentation I'd written, tweaked a few headings, and sent it to upper management under his name. I was pushed down to a support role. I left the bank that day with nothing but a briefcase and a heart that had cracked, but I didn't leave my savings. Last winter, I spent the season researching abandoned property auctions. The name Fairway Court Lot 72 appeared on the list in February. The only image was a blurred black and white satellite shot. Everyone at the auction scrolled past it as if they couldn't be bothered. But I went to see it for myself. The house was a disaster. Peeling walls, boarded-up windows, an old oak leaning hard toward the roof. Still, something quieted inside me the moment I stepped onto the porch. It wasn't pretty, warm, or quaint, but it didn't ask if I was the favored child. It didn't compare me to anyone. It simply stood there, cold and worn, waiting to be brought back to life. I accepted the starting bid of $1,200. No one else offered higher. When I signed the deed, the auctioneer looked at me as if I were crazy. I didn't care. For me, it was the first victory no one could take away. Until they showed up. My mother walked up the steps without so much as a greeting. Ivy came right behind her, white high heels marking each step across cracked cement. She clutched a huge cream tote that matched the cashmere coat draped over her shoulders. Behind them was a man in a white shirt and a pale gray tie, carrying a leather briefcase. Jameson, my father's lawyer since I was in high school. I didn't need to look closely to recognize him. My mother didn't say hello, sweetie. She didn't ask if I was okay. She stared straight at me as if I were a waiter who'd forgotten to bring a bill. "We need to talk inside," she said. I crossed my arms and stood in the doorway. "Why did the 3 of you have to come all the way out here?" I asked. Ivy gave a small laugh. "Ro, you're living in squalor. I just couldn't not worry." I turned to my mother. You came out here because I bought a wreck of a house? No, she said in a voice that sounded like reading a charge sheet. We came because you used money that, in principle, should have been discussed. This isn't just a property. It's a legal matter. I snorted. My savings. My private account. The deeds in my name alone. What legal matter? Jameson opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. There's a memorandum from 2002 between your father and the former landowner. It may affect current title. How could it affect it? I asked, a storm starting inside my chest. Ivy cut in. Do you know this place once belonged to Grandma? I froze. What? She used to set up a charitable fund that used this address for mail and donations. After she died, your father converted it, but some documents still connect here. If those documents surface, it could cause a lot of trouble. I took a step back, my forehead cold. And trouble, my mother added, is something this family doesn't accept. So, what do you want? I asked. Hand over the keys. We'll handle it. You'll be compensated. Compensated? We can transfer you $5,000. Enough to rent a small, quiet apartment somewhere. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. They always assumed I could be bought off with something adequate, but not better than what Ivy had. I stepped back and opened the door behind me. If you want this house back, you'll have to take me to court. Jameson shook his head and turned away. Ivy clicked her tongue as if I were a stubborn child. My mother stared at me with a mix of contempt and warning. They left, leaving the scent of expensive perfume lingering through the battered rooms. I shut the door. The lock clicked like a verdict. I didn't feel fear so much as something else igniting. Maybe I wasn't the child they chose to love, but I would make them remember me. Not out of spite, but because finally I had something they couldn't control. And I would not let it go without a fight. That night was a Saturday in mid-April. The air still held a bite even though the calendar had turned to spring. And I remember sitting motionless for 30 minutes on the long wooden bench in my parents' dining room, trying not to look at anyone. The room was lit by the chandelier my mother loved to tell everyone was imported from Italy. A bright, abstract yellow painting hung on the wall that my father called a symbol of prosperity. The air smelled heavy with tomato sauce from the lasagna cooling on the table. Ivy, as usual, arrived late. She came in like she was stepping onto a red carpet, holding a matcha latte with the lid still on, smiling and calling out, "Sorry, everyone, the shoot ran long." My father stood to pull out a chair for her while my mother topped off Ivy's nearly full glass of white wine without even glancing my way. I have big news, Ivy said, setting her bag down beside her chair. My first spiritual retreat is about to launch in Arizona. I booked a spot in Sedona so peaceful, perfect for resetting energy. My mother nodded as if listening to a scholar present a paper. She has vision. She's not just an influencer. She inspires healthy living. I cut a slice of lasagna and chewed slowly, staying quiet. But I felt my father's gaze bore into me. "Piper," he said, setting down his knife and fork. "You said last week you would transfer the funds. Where is the money?" I looked at him, then at Ivy, who was absorbed in her phone. "I didn't transfer it," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. The sound of a fork hitting a plate was sharp when Ivy stopped eating. My mother set down her wine glass and leaned forward. "What did you say?" "I used that money to buy a house." The room went silent. Ivy broke the silence with a loud laugh, shaking her head like she'd just heard a bad joke. "You bought a house?" "What kind of house? Paper house?" "I won a small property at auction. It needs a lot of work, but the deed's clean. I don't owe anyone a cent." "You're serious?" Ivy leaned across the table. "You promised Mom you'd help with the deposit. The retreat can't wait." "I've already put down a deposit." "No one asked me. Everyone just assumed I would hand the money over." My father folded his arms, his expression dark. "That's selfish. You know Ivy's project isn't only a business. It's a mission. It can save struggling souls." I swallowed. My throat felt dry. "I'm struggling too, and no one stepped in to save me." My mother laughed coldly. "If you choose to be poor, then fend for yourself from now on." Ivy pursed her lips and smiled lightly. "That's so typical of you, pour money into a chicken coop and live like a caveman." "Fascinating." I didn't answer. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. My hands trembled slightly, but I didn't want them to see. My father continued in a measured tone, as if reading from a script. From now on, don't expect support from the family. If you insist on being independent, then be independent. I looked around the room, the spot I'd been made to scrub as a child. The kitchen table where I did homework while Ivy was chauffeured to dance lessons. They told me to be strong, yet whenever I stood up straight, they called me dramatic. I pulled my chair back and stood. I didn't come here to beg for money. I thought, at least, that family meant something. But if that's wrong, then I'll stop coming. My mother didn't say a word. Ivy turned back to her phone. My father lifted his glass and took a sip as if the dinner were still proceeding. I left in silence. The door closed behind me with no one seeing me off. The porch light glowed, but it felt like ice. When I got back to the little house I'd bought, I sat on the warped wooden steps. There was no moon, only the damp smell of mildew in the air. I didn't turn on a light. I just sat and thought about the dinner and felt like I'd removed myself from a rope that had been tightening for years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my mother. Remove your name from the Easter plans. The family doesn't need negative energy. I didn't reply. I folded the phone into my old coat. My hands still had a red mark from prying off a plank from the living room wall the day before. I didn't have any positive energy to give. I only had the will to survive. And sometimes, as I'd learned, that's enough. I moved into the old house on a Sunday morning, 3 days after that broken dinner. A rented pickup showed up early. The driver helped me carry in a few heavy boxes and hurried off, his face apologetic as he looked at the cracked walls and sagging roof. I stood in the empty living room, stunned. The house was colder and darker than I'd imagined. I kept telling myself I had chosen this. No one would tell me to tidy up. No one would remind me about Ivy's success. No one would give me that look when I mentioned an idea. There was only me, a key in my hand, and a house that might fall down. I started by prying a few boards off the windows to let in some natural light. When I opened 2 of the panes, dust billowed everywhere and the long-standing mildew hit me in the face. I coughed until I could barely breathe. Maybe no one had stepped inside this house for a decade. That afternoon, I swept the ground floor wooden floorboards lightly, then moved the essential items into the kitchen. I didn't bring much. An old kettle, a few mismatched plates and bowls, a small electric hot plate, a bag of coffee, and some packaged groceries. I set them neatly on a folding table by the window and sat down, exhaling a long breath. The sun was tilting when I accidentally discovered a small door leading to the basement behind the storage cabinet. The door was hidden behind a shabby plank. The hinge was so rusted I had to push hard with my back to make it budge. A cold gust blew up the dark stairs, as if something below was still holding its breath and not ready to be seen. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped down one creaking step at a time. Each board complained beneath my feet. The basement had a low ceiling, mottled concrete walls, and a floor covered with damp sand and moss. There was a faint smell of old paper and rusty metal, but not unbearable. I swept the beam of the light around, intending to take a quick look and go back up. In the far corner, I saw a metal filing cabinet, its silver paint mostly flaked away. A thick layer of dust lay on top. The lock was broken and the lid was slightly ajar. I pulled the top drawer. Thick stacks of files, yellowed at the edges and with damp corners, but the type was still legible. The typed cover sheet read plainly, Callahan Family Fund donor receipts and correspondence. I froze. Callahan was my mother's maiden name. And a family fund, nobody in the house had ever mentioned such an organization. I flipped through a few folders. Donation lists, pre-printed thank you letters, bank transfer receipts from names I recognized, Dr. Williams, the Kingsleys, even a well-known Italian restaurant in the city. The amounts weren't massive individually, but they ran from 2001 to 2006. Another file cover read, Grant Application Inner Hope Women's Shelter. Beneath it was an approved funding request, signed by the fund's representative, Evelyn Callahan, my mother. I sat down on the floor, the paper trembling in my hands. In all the family dinners, celebrations, and speeches about service and tradition, no one had ever once mentioned a charity under our name. I found a thin packet tucked at the bottom of the drawer. The outer envelope was plain, brown, and old. Inside was a photocopy of a check for $75,000 made out to the Callahan Family Fund from a large real estate corporation. No stated purpose. Accompanying it was a printed email from 2003 sent from someone named A. Mitchell. Subject line, allocation of support. The message was only a few lines. Evelyn, thank you for arranging this. As agreed, the remaining funds will be transferred to the main address at Fairway Court. Main address. Meaning this house. I'm no legal expert, but I've worked in finance long enough to understand what I was holding. A charity operating on donations is one thing, but funds actually funneled to a private residential address, an address no one talks about, is a red flag for misuse. I folded the paper back up and shoved all the files into a canvas bag, clutching it to my chest. The cold kitchen was now lit only by the flashlight beam on the wall. I sat down and breathed heavily. Questions piled up in my head. Why had my parents hidden this fund? Why had they never mentioned it, even as they proudly recounted Ivy's charity trips? And why the moment I bought this house did they immediately bring a lawyer to demand it back, when before that they'd shown no interest in any property except their own mansion? I opened my laptop and began searching for information about the Callahan Charitable Fund. There was no official website, no active listings on public platforms. I checked the state nonprofit database and found one brief line: Callahan Family Fund status, dissolved. Closed in 2007. No reason given. I leaned back in my chair, staring up at the smoke-darkened ceiling. Part of me wanted to bundle everything and send it straight to the district attorney. But another part hesitated. I needed to understand more. If I acted hastily, they would know, and they would erase whatever traces remained. I picked up my phone to call someone I used to work with at the bank, Evan, who handled charitable grants and audits. Then I stopped myself. It was too soon. I needed certainty. I carried the bag of documents upstairs and hid it in the bottom drawer of the wardrobe, then returned to the kitchen and boiled water. Outside, the wind hissed. The old house felt like it had a soul, and tonight it had begun to tell stories my family had worked so hard to forget. I woke at 5:30 a.m. to the tin roof rattling overhead. The heavy rain the night before had soaked into the wall behind the stove, leaving a damp streak like a slash along the house's chest. I wiped it with an old towel, then brewed a pot of coffee on the little electric kettle by the cast-iron stove. Steam fogged the window. In that mist, I saw my father standing on the old porch, a newspaper in hand, his eyes never once meeting mine. The coffee was still hot when memories spilled in. I was 8, when Ivy started dance. Every Wednesday afternoon, my mother drove her to class and sometimes stopped to buy chocolate milk and a cinnamon roll wrapped in a napkin. I stayed home to make dinner and do the dishes. My father never asked how I was doing in school. He asked whether Ivy was tired. On Ivy's 16th birthday, my father parked a white Mini Cooper in front of the house with a red bow the size of a wedding cake. Friends poured out from every corner of the house, laughing and taking pictures as if the moment were on TV. I watched from the second-floor window. I had worked summer shifts at a bookstore that year, hoping to pay for an advanced writing class. My mother called that unrealistic. I still remember slipping in the backyard and hitting my head on the stone table, blood soaking my collar. Ivy was live streaming on her phone. When she saw me stumble into the frame, she didn't stop the video, she angled the camera at me and laughed. Look at my sister, always, chasing attention. No one mentioned the 3 stitches in my brow. But Ivy got more than 3,000 likes for her little drama clip. I told myself it was personality differences. She was outgoing, I was quiet. Mother said that so often I began to believe it. But living in that house taught me something else. What I had dismissed as random was deliberate. That morning, after wiping the damp patch, I climbed to the attic to find old materials to patch the porch leak, or at least some rags to block a vent. The attic was low and I had to stoop. I took a flashlight because the hanging bulb was dead. In one corner, there was a wooden trunk caked in dust. The sides were dented, but the latch was still intact. I sat down, pried off the rusty hasps, and opened it. The smell of mildew and old paper hit me like something pleading not to be forgotten. Inside were several photo albums, loose documents, and a small tin box stamped with the faded logo of a local bank. I pulled each item out and laid them on the worn floorboards. The first album was full of family photos, my parents, Ivy, and me. But my appearances in the pictures were faded or cropped, so only half my face showed. One photo made me stop cold. My mother standing at a podium beneath a banner strung across the entrance of this very house. The banner read, Callahan Fundraising Gala for Young Women Overcoming Hardship. Beneath the banner was a long table with a white cloth, stacked pamphlets, envelopes, a donation box, and little candles. Ivy, at about 12, in a white dress, stood in the yard handing the microphone to my mother. Me? I couldn't find myself in the frame. On the back, someone had written, October 2004, over $25,000 in one evening. In blue ink, the rounded script I recognized as my mother's. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I dug deeper into the tin. There were bank form printouts, no recipient names listed, only internal, transfer account, and the receiving address listed as Fairway Court, the house where I sat. A picture began to come together behind everything they'd said and done. This house wasn't the abandoned property they'd called it. It had been the center of what looked like a legitimate operation, but with money moving in ways that didn't add up. And the way they reacted when I bought it convinced me it was the knot they didn't want anyone to touch. I brought all the documents down and spread them across the kitchen table. I organized each paper by year, sticking little notes on the timeline. Then, at 2007, the trail went cold. No further reports, no additional receipts. I opened my laptop and looked up the Callahan Fund after 2007. Status: dissolved. No reason given. I leaned back and stared at the stack of paperwork towering in front of me. I thought of my mother's lines. There are things you don't need to know to live peacefully. And Ivy knows how to perform in public. You don't. It wasn't that I didn't fit. It was that I was too different for them to hide me away safely. Maybe it started with a bad check, or donations never reaching the intended recipients. But what they feared wasn't only the truth about the money. It was the person who would dig it up, the very child they had spent decades erasing. I picked up the photo of my mother under the banner and studied her expression while she spoke. She smiled widely at the camera, eyes fixed on the lens. That look, I had never felt it directed at me. I folded the photo and slipped it into the bag with the other papers. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the rain fall, and I didn't feel alone in the rotting house. I felt like I stood at a crossroads of a story never told, and the one person who remembered enough to tell it was me. That afternoon, after almost 3 hours of sorting papers under the weak kitchen light, I decided to step outside for air. My hands ached from handling paper, my back a dull ache from sleeping on the thin mattress on the living room floor. I put on a sweater and crossed the porch. The weather was mild, the sun like warm honey, spreading over waist-high weeds in the neighboring lots. This was an old residential area, nearly 3 miles from downtown. Many houses were empty or poorly maintained. Still, the house across the street had a tidy front porch, 2 trimmed planters, and an American flag neatly placed at the corner of the white picket fence. I was about to walk the block when a voice called, "You the girl in number 72?" It croaked from the opposite porch. I nodded. "Yes, I'm Piper." "Piper." He repeated the name and nodded slowly. "You're Evelyn's grandchild, right?" I froze. "You know my grandmother?" "Sure do." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm Harris. I've lived here since 1973. Your grandmother was the only one on this block kids called the Cookie Fairy." I crossed the street and stood against the fence. "She used to hand out food to the kids here, right?" "More than that," he said with a wry smile. "She turned that house into a refuge for girls who'd been abused. The whole neighborhood knew about it." My throat went dry. The things I'd found in the basement suddenly snapped into sharper shape. I leaned on the fence. "Mr. Harris? I want to ask something. Did Grandma leave this house to anyone?" His face dimmed a little. "Yes. She made a proper will. The house was left to her eldest grandchild, Piper. Your name is right there on the paper." A wind seemed to howl louder through my ears. "So, why didn't I know? My parents told me the house had been sold long ago. They said she left nothing." He put a hand on his cane and stood up slowly. "They said that because they sold it right after your grandmother died. Quietly. Through a middleman, under the guise of a fund transfer." I gripped the fence until my knuckles hurt. Are you sure? More sure than anything, he replied. I've lived here over 40 years. I remember the morning the broker's sign went up. I called your mother and asked why they sold Granny Evelyn's house. She just laughed and said, the paperwork was done long ago, family business. I stepped back. My heart pounded not with anger but with pain. I'd lost Grandma when I was in middle school. I remembered the funeral morning my mother made me wear a faded floral dress I hated while Ivy had a new velvet dress and brand new shoes. After that, nobody mentioned Grandma. No altar, no photo, no talk of the house. Now I understood. They hadn't forgotten. They had erased. Piper? Mr. Harris said softly, his voice turning grave. You have a right to be there. But if you keep it, your family won't stop. I looked up. What do you mean? They think, you don't know. If you begin to ask, if you start pulling papers, they'll panic. And when people like your parents panic, they don't apologize. They take back what they can. I stood silent. You need to be prepared, he continued. Not just legally, but mentally. You're about to touch a part of them they spent a lifetime building to hide. I'm not going to give up, I said, my voice low but firm. Mr. Harris looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Then you should keep everything you have very safe. Don't trust anyone who knocks on your door saying they're coming out of concern. I thanked him and headed back toward my house. The afternoon sun was tilting. In that light, the place no longer looked as ugly as the first day I walked in. It looked like a layer of buried memory, dug up and breathing again. I opened the door, went in, locked it with 3 bolts, and went straight to the room where I kept the files. I pulled the canvas bag of documents, took out and set it on the table. In my hand was a photo of my mother standing in the yard, smiling broadly under the Callahan Fund banner. That smile felt anything but warm. It felt calculated. I set the photo aside, opened my laptop, and began typing notes line by line. Name of the fund. Years of operation. Signatories. Unusual grants. And now, a new question. Where did Grandma's will go? I knew someone on the outside had seen something. This story was no longer just about a house. It was about what people are willing to erase to protect a reputation, and whether I was strong enough to hold on to what was rightfully mine. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through the Callahan Fund file, so focused I didn't hear the car stop at the gate. Only when a soft laugh floated through the cracked window did I look up. That familiar sound made my skin crawl. I stepped out onto the porch. The door hadn't quite shut behind me when Ivy stood in the gravel drive, white high heels like fresh snow, a cream silk dress clinging to her, a phone held high toward her face. Behind her, a shiny black SUV idled angled to the curb, hazard lights blinking as if her arrival were a performance. Hello, my little angels, Ivy cooed to the camera, voice saccharine. Today, I'm here at the house my sister is trying to restore. A really challenging place. I stood at the edge of the doorway, eyes fixed on her. Ivy glanced my way, then feigned surprise. Oh, there she is. My darling sister, want to say hi to everyone? I folded my arms, voice low. What are you doing here? You look so stressed. Ivy replied, smiling brightly. I just wanted to stop by and offer some support. You're living here alone. You must need some family, right? I didn't answer. Ivy took a few steps closer and turned the camera fully toward the house. This house, she said loudly, has history. People ask me why someone with a finance background would choose to live in a place like this. I think sometimes we can't understand the pain someone else carries, right? She paused, as if to let her words sink in. I could hear the keyboard taps from the live stream chat, viewers interacting, sending hearts, commenting. I walked down 3 steps and stood straight at the gate. Turn off the live stream. Then talk like a human. Ivy lowered the phone but didn't turn it off. She looked at me with an expression part pity, part amusement. I felt I should record this, in case later you claim I made it up. You're making it up right now. She laughed, but her eyes were cold. Do you know how many messages I've had asking about you? People are worried, some even wonder if you're unwell, given how you've cut yourself off from the family. I didn't cut myself off. They pushed me out. Oh, you always tell things like it's a tragedy. I choose to live positively. I stared straight into her eyes. If you have any shame left, Turn that phone off and leave. She faced the camera again and forced a smile. We'll pause here, my little angels. Keep your energy positive. When she finally shut the feed, her tone shifted. I came to give notice. Mom and Dad sent a letter. You'll probably get it tomorrow morning. They've spoken with a lawyer. About what? The deed transfer paperwork. There may be defects. It could be invalidated. I gripped the collar of my coat, my heart pounding. I bought that property legally at a county auction. My name is on the title. They have no claim. Ivy smiled lightly. Legal is one thing, technicalities are another. And you should know, our family has friends in real estate. Then they'll have to explain a lot if I hand the basement files to the district attorney. Her smile faded. For a moment I saw an expression she didn't fully control, not flustered, but tense. What are you talking about? She asked. I know exactly what I'm talking about. She nodded slowly, adjusted her bag strap. Then, things won't be easy. I didn't answer. Ivy turned away and walked back to the SUV. Before she climbed in, she called back over her shoulder. People will think you're crazy. They've thought it for a long time. You're doing a great job proving them right. The SUV drove off down the gravel road, throwing dust into the late afternoon sun. I went back inside, hands trembling slightly. I wasn't afraid of them. I was afraid of what they could invent, and of the reach of their influence, if they chose to use it. That night, while typing a few notes into my report file, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. No sender. Be careful. They don't want the house. They want what you found in the basement. I sat frozen. I typed back. Who is this? No reply. I tried calling. The line said the number didn't exist. I turned on every light in the house, checked the windows, the locks, the basement. Everything seemed unchanged. Still, my sense of safety had been shaken. I hauled out all the paper files and spread them across the table. I photographed each page and saved the images to a secure folder on my computer, then uploaded copies to a cloud storage account. I took handwritten notes and organized the documents into a logical sequence, as if I were preparing to submit them to an investigative committee. When everything was archived, I pulled out the thinnest packet. Someone had written on the cover, Dissolution Documents Callahan Fund Filing Date. Unknown. I opened it. There was a single page bearing a faint bank stamp. I photographed it, then set it aside. If they came back, I would be ready. But this time I would not come empty-handed, and I would not be silent. It took me nearly 2 days to settle down after that anonymous message. Both nights I hardly slept, lying on the thin mattress with my eyes wide, staring at the smoke-darkened ceiling, listening to the wind hit the roof, the cold whisper through the gaps. Something in me had shifted. It wasn't just suspicion or anger. It was a deep awareness. I was touching a piece of memory my family had worked hard to bury. I thought about that basement. Not the dusty room I'd rifled through earlier, but the hidden wooden door under the steps to the old laundry room. The first time I saw it, I assumed it was an empty coal box. But that morning, when the sun cut across through the ground floor window, I could see more clearly. A side door just about shoulder height, secured with a hasp lock so old the green paint had nearly peeled away. I found the lock-picking kit in the old toolbox I'd brought from my apartment in Columbus. Part of me still hesitated. If I forced that lock, I could no longer pretend ignorance. But if I didn't open it, I couldn't live at peace. The lock was rustier than I expected. I had to bend pliers and pound the hinge with a hammer. Metal rang in the basement like an alarm bell. When the last hasp snapped, the door screamed on its hinges and cracked open. Behind it was a small, low-ceilinged room with no windows, rough concrete walls, and a hard-packed dirt floor. The smell of decaying paper and rust made me cover my nose. In one corner sat a black metal trunk balanced on 2 bricks. Beside it stood a small wooden shelf holding stacks of office-style file boxes, each labeled in handwriting. I had no words. These were not scattered relics or loose pages as I'd previously found. This was an archive, cataloged, numbered, organized. I pulled one box down. The cover read, Callahan Fund 2002 to 2005. Inside were bank receipts, transfer invoices, mass-printed thank you letters never mailed. even projected budgets signed by my mother. Every sheet fit together like puzzle pieces, leaving no gaps. An old accounting printout listed column headers in English. Incoming donations disbursement notes. I scanned the totals column. $382,450. I felt numb. Nearly $400,000 had flowed through the Callahan Fund. The donor list included not only neighborhood families, but businesses, churches, and even a former mayor. I carefully pulled out stacks of documents and photographed them with my phone. Each record showed sender names, account numbers, transfer dates, and notes on intended use. Some entries read broadly: community operating expenses, support for women's reentry, education fund. But cross-checks with bank records showed many amounts never reached the listed organizations. They cycled through accounts under my father's name or shell companies. In the black trunk, I found something that held me motionless for nearly a minute. A leather-bound notebook, its spine hand-stitched, my mother's handwriting on the first page. Private notes do not share. I opened it and read page after page of dense entries, as if she were scripting a production rather than running charity work. One passage detailed a meeting with a grant recipient abbreviated J&R Holdings, with no address. In the margin she had written, "Ivy must appear at the gala, boost online reach. Don't let Piper attend, doesn't photograph well." I clutched the notebook to my chest. My breathing felt heavy. This was not only financial misconduct. I had been written out of the story from the very conception. In another corner of the trunk was a small plastic bag of faded fax pages. I fanned them out. One was from Jameson and Associates, the same law firm my parents brought by the house, recommending accelerating dissolution of the fund to avoid financial scrutiny. The date: 3 weeks after my grandmother's death. I sat down on the cold floor, the flashlight beam cutting across the piles of files around my feet. At that moment, it felt less like living in an old house and more like standing in an abandoned crime scene, sins not buried in the ground, but neatly catalogued and sealed. Everything in me broke and became eerily clear at once. I packed the files back up and brought them upstairs. I logged every date, every person involved. In my head, I drew a map of tangled relationships: father, mother, Ivy, the lawyer, the named recipient organizations. Each link could tip the whole thing over if I misstepped. I opened my computer and created a new folder titled Core. Because what I held was not the outer shell of a secret, it was the core. And when the core cracks, the shell they'd built for 2 decades would collapse. I spent a whole morning at the rickety kitchen table, spreading documents across the surface. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock tick. I had uploaded everything to the cloud, but I still needed the tactile weight of each file. The numbers on the receipts felt like a chorus telling me it was time to bring this into the light. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name I had kept from a community meeting: Amanda Reed. She was young, around 30, a law graduate from Cleveland who specialized in nonprofits and asset disputes. I remembered one line she'd said at the meetup. It had made me save her number. "The truth doesn't rise on its own. It needs someone brave enough to push it up." I called. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Amanda Reed speaking. "Hello, I'm Piper Callahan. We haven't really met, but I got your number from a talk at the public library. I need legal help." Amanda was silent for a few seconds. "What's your situation?" I inhaled. "It concerns a dissolved charitable fund, and I have documents proving my family misused hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm also the heir to the house that served as the fund's headquarters, but now they're trying to take it back." Amanda's voice was steady, without hesitation. "I want to see the files. We can meet in person. I have availability tomorrow at my office in Columbus. Can you bring the documents?" "I will." "Good. And Piper, keep everything very secure. Don't trust anyone except me until we talk." I hung up, my heart still hammering. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. That afternoon, while packing the files into a zippered bag to prepare for the next day, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Texts, notifications, even emails. I opened one. The screen displayed a GoFundMe link. "Help my sister rebuild her life. Organizer, Ivy Callahan." The cover photo was of me, taken from a live stream when she showed up at my gate, hair messy, a worn sweater, standing on the old wooden porch. Below it was the appeal. My sister, Piper, is mentally unstable. She chose to live isolated in an unsafe, abandoned house. I'm asking the community to help her regain stability and a decent home. The amount shown on the page, $11,460, raised in just a few hours. Hundreds of comments praised Ivy. You're so kind. Lucky to have a sister like you. I sent a little to help her. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't only smear. Ivy was turning my pain into a product to trade for money and fame. I reopened the live stream clips I'd saved. In one, Ivy stands at the gate, half smiling, half ailing. My sister. She sometimes lives in her own world. But I still love her and hope she finds the light. Behind her, the camera pans to the peeling house, making me the perfect witness for the fabricated story of illness she was selling. I plugged my phone into the computer and began downloading every clip, every photo, even the comment threads from Ivy's broadcast. I saved each file, numbered them, and built a spreadsheet comparing her claims with the real images. As I worked, I felt both furious and wounded. But that anger no longer made me shake as it used to. It sharpened my focus. Night fell. I turned on the desk lamp and pulled another batch of files from the basement. I labeled every folder: bank receipts, donor lists, Jameson legal correspondence. I photographed everything, saved hard copies to an external drive, and locked them in a small safe I'd bought at a used shop. Around midnight, I got a video call from Ivy. I didn't answer. A minute later, a text arrived. Sis, I just want to help. Let me take care of you, like I always do. I read that line and let out a dry laugh. Like you always do meant take everything that belongs to me, even my image, and shape it into a money-making tool for her. I typed back, everything you post, I've saved. And I won't be silent anymore. Message sent. The screen stayed dark. Ivy didn't reply. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. Outside, the night wind rustled the trees. The house was still falling apart, but inside I had built a fortress of files, data, and evidence. Tomorrow, when I met Amanda, I would not go empty-handed. I would bring everything my family had tried to hide. And this time, I would let the truth speak for itself. Amanda and I rode in an old yellow taxi across neon-lit New York streets. The city was loud as always, but inside me there was a strange calm. The bag of files on my lap felt heavy, not just with paper, but with years of being overlooked and dismissed. Amanda sat beside me, adjusting documents on her tablet, voice low and sure. We sent scans to 3 major papers. Reporters will be there tonight. And the court is sending people on schedule. I nodded, watching lights flash by outside the window. Then all that's left is timing. The event hotel stood on 5th Avenue. When I stepped out, the scene felt like a staged film. A long red carpet, shutterbugs jostling, camera flashes strobing. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with hundreds of crystal chandeliers, tables dressed in white, glassware, lined up in perfect rows. Ivy appeared exactly as I'd imagined. An emerald evening gown studded with crystals, ruby lips, a smile so bright it seemed the room existed to reflect her glow. My parents hovered near, my father shaking hands with donors, my mother exchanging social kisses with women in gala gowns. Everything ran like a well-rehearsed play. I sat in the back row, hidden in the dark. I wanted to be unnoticed. Amanda sat next to me, eyes cold and fixed on the stage. The host spoke. Tonight we honor a fresh face, an inspiration. Ivy Callahan, founder of the New Callahan Fund, carrying forward the family legacy. Applause thundered. Ivy stepped out, beaming and curtsying. The big screen behind her showed images of her holding clean-clothed children, hand in hand, all designed to pull at hearts. The music swelled to heighten emotion. Ivy spoke, voice lilting, full of feeling. We don't just raise money, we plant hope. My family has always lived for the community. I carry that on with love and faith in change. More applause. Cameras flashed. Then, in the middle of the ovation, a man in a suit walked to the edge of the stage. He handed Ivy a large envelope stamped in red. She froze. The room buzzed. She opened it and skimmed the page, eyes flicking over the words. From where I sat, I could see a summons. Her hand trembled. Her smile stayed plastered. Just administrative procedure. She stammered into the mic, voice uneven. Amanda leaned toward me. It's our turn. The giant screen flickered. Ivy's staged images vanished and were replaced by screenshots of messages from her own phone. Black text on a white background scrolled into view. Leave her in that trash house. That's how we get pity. The audience erupted. Whispers swelled into shouts. Phones held aloft. Live streams streaming. A second message appeared. Just make her look miserable. We'll have the perfect fundraising story. People's tears sell. Breathing quickened. Chairs scraped. Some sponsors jumped up, faces flushed. A woman in a black evening gown called out, "Where did our money go?" Ivy panicked and turned to my parents. My father rushed forward to grab the mic, but the host pulled it back, wary of the spiraling scene. My mother whispered frantically in Ivy's ear, but the anger on the front row faces could not be hidden. Reporters surged forward, flashes popping rapidly. I watched a man in a gray suit hurry to the VIP section. Amanda nodded. That was the courthouse official we'd arranged. He spoke with the organizers and began handing copies of the summons to reporters. The room fractured. Everyone talked and photographed. The live feeds multiplied into thousands. Ivy tried to regain composure, fingers smoothing her hair, voice shaking. This is a misunderstanding. Everything's been edited. Please trust me. I only want to help my sister. Instantly, the screen flashed another image. Ivy filming outside my gate, eyes falsely sympathetic, overlaid with a private chat she'd sent a friend. Don't worry. The community will swallow it. Just make her look wretched. Someone in the sponsor row screamed, I wrote a check for $50,000. Another person raised a phone and shouted, We've been duped. Color drained from Ivy's face. Her lips quivered. My parents were pale, scanning for exits. I sat still in the back row, not moving. No stage walk, no shouting. The truth was speaking on its own. Amanda placed a hand lightly on mine and whispered, The construct has collapsed. Under the strobe of flashbulbs, I saw Ivy reduced, small on too large stage. Her manufactured smile, unable to hide ambition and deceit. The very hall they'd used to flaunt their family legacy had become the place that exposed it all. After that night in New York, the press kept running investigations. Images of Ivy stunned on stage, the message exposed, spread across news sites. The next evening, my parents appeared on the local news, not as proud founders of a long-standing charity, but under headlines, The Callahans investigated for misuse of donor funds. The district attorney moved quickly. Amanda called often with progress updates. They'll comb through the records, Piper, she told me. The scans you sent are pivotal. They've been accepted as preliminary evidence. I was stunned to hear it. Years of being treated like a shadow, years erased from family photos, suddenly became the weight forcing my parents to answer. Over the ensuing months, the press dug deeper. Many who had once donated to the Callahan Fund distanced themselves. Businesses that once proudly displayed the fund's logo quietly pulled away. My mother, once invited to speak at social events, had appearances canceled. My father, who always wore a tailored suit to shake establishment hands, showed up only in hurried photos stepping out of lawyers' offices, exhausted. As for Ivy, her social campaigns crumbled in days. Brands that had paid her withdrew, announcing they'd ceased collaboration. Her feeds flooded with scornful comments. Old live streams were clipped and circulated as evidence of deceit. I watched it all from the old house on Fairway Court. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a strange lightness. I decided to do what I'd wanted for years. Turn the house that symbolized contempt into something meaningful. With the remaining savings and a small municipal home repair grant, I started renovations. Walls were repainted, the roof replaced, warped floorboards sanded. Neighbors, including Mr. Harris, helped cut down the leaning oak threatening the eaves. When work neared completion, I hung a small sign on the front. Callahan Community Center Personal Finance Classes for Kids and Parents. Neighborhood kids poured in. They sat around the long kitchen table, laughing as I sketched simple diagrams on a whiteboard about saving, spending, and giving. A little girl with curly hair asked, Miss, can money disappear like magic? I smiled. If you let others decide for you, maybe. But if you learn to control it, money helps you choose your path. On weekends, the living room filled. Parents sat down to hear about opening bank accounts and avoiding bad debt. Those dry topics became bridges between me and the community. A year passed. The house no longer smelled of mildew. The air sometimes carried the scent of cookies brought by neighborhood mothers. The walls displayed children's drawings, rainbows, suns, green trees. I often stood on the porch in the late afternoon, listening to laughter on the breeze, feeling life seep into the old boards. One March morning, my phone buzzed. A message from a familiar number. Ivy. Sis, I need a place to stay. Everything's fallen apart. Can I crash with you for a while? I read the message twice. For a moment, the image flashed back my sister on the stage, smiling about family, legacy. Then the private message urging us to leave her in that trash house. I typed my reply. There's no room here for lies anymore. I wish you peace. I set the phone down and stepped onto the porch. A cool spring breeze moved through the new garden I'd planted. The house they'd called trash now shone with voices, hope, and truth. I stood quietly, looking up at the sign, feeling calm. The house had been reborn, and with it, a new life of my own had begun. Sometimes I still wonder, if I'd obediently given the money to Ivy for that retreat or handed the keys back to my parents, would I ever have had the chance to stand on my own? Maybe I would have continued on inside a spiral of lies, reduced to a voiceless shadow. But I chose to keep a broken roof over my head, and through it I found my real worth. My story might make people consider, when family turns away, do you submit or walk away to keep the truth? I want to hear your view. If it were you, what would you do when relatives try to take not only your property, but your dignity and voice? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I value every perspective. And if you want to keep listening to stories full of turmoil about family, betrayal, and the path to reclaiming oneself, follow the channel. There are many more family stories waiting to be told.